just summarise the last three priorities and then give you an overview. First priority was to tackle drug supply in the east of the city. We've continued to do a number of warrants at premises which are housing drug dealers, as well as taking people out on the street. Increasingly we are seeing London drug dealers coming up, housing themselves in Cambridge. They generally find houses where there's very vulnerable people inside, either through drugs, age, any number of special needs, any different type of vulnerability, and they exploit that and they sit in the house and deal with drugs from that. So that's a very big problem. We've locked up several of those who cover lots of drugs, and we are really targeting those at the moment. To give you some, we've done Budley Close, that was a London drug dealer, George Benton Court, that was a London drug dealer. We are finding increasing numbers coming up. The one good thing I would say is the situation at the moment is once we get reports of them and the intelligence, we go and we find them and we arrest them, and we're getting quite successful at it. So that's the situation with drugs at the moment, and I would strongly recommend we continue that priority. Again, we've continued the priority of sort of ASB in the Mill Road and other areas on the east, and that's, I think, probably been the longest running priority. And definitely the reports from Mill Road are going down, and increasingly most of the city, or most of the east, is going down with sort of spikes in the Ditchburn Place area. Newmarket Road near the Elizabeth Way roundabout and underneath the roundabout, we're also getting spikes there. So what we've done, we do daily patrols. The street life officers go out every day and assess this, if it's street life, we see if we can work with them, try and help them. We see make sure they've got medical care, places to stay. We liaise with places like Jimmy's. We also do the enforcement, so if people are causing problems, we use Section 27 dispersal powers, where we move them on from an area for 72 hours. If they commit criminal offences, we will arrest them. I say that's daily patrols on that, and we are seeing a decrease overall. We're down on last year with the three main areas that I've said: Newmarket Road, Elizabeth Way, roundabout Ditchburn Place, and Petersfield Green. They're still the key areas. We still focus mainly on them, however it is reducing, so I'm quite pleased about that. So the situation is better, and we've just got through this summer with the lighter days, which we normally see the real spike in incidents. So I'm quite pleased to see that's gone down in those areas. The last priority was to reduce shoplifting and theft generally in the east. Year on year, for the quarter we were looking at, it's down overall. However, we still have a core number of shops which account for a disproportionate amount of shoplifting. Now you're always going to get that. The bigger the shop, they're always going to get hit more. However, we are continuing to work with them, and slowly we're seeing a reduction, but nowhere near at the speed I'd like, so I'd like to continue to work with them. And the message, I think, is slowly getting through that actually it's in their interest to just sometimes let's change the shop layout, and that works. We target, the city has about a number of sort of key shoplifters. The minute they're released from prison, we target them straight away, not just the East team, but that's done by the whole of Cambridge City Police to again work with. If they want to work with us, we'll help them. If they don't, we will look to convict them as soon as possible and get them back in front of the court. And that helps reduce the shoplifting. We've run our operation. We do it about once a month, for a week, where we target all the shops, extra patrols, and that does reduce the crime. Unfortunately, it's like anything, I don't have resources to do it every day. I wish I did, but I don't. So I'd like to continue to do that as well. So overall, if you look at the three priorities, by far I would say the biggest risk, and if you're talking safeguarding terms, are to the vulnerable people in our community, where in particular, not always, but in particular, London drug dealers are coming up. And they keep changing their tactics a little bit, but we do keep catching them. But that is what draws some very nasty people, I believe, from London. We know they're very nasty people, we catch them and look at their history. And they're sitting in very vulnerable people in Cambridge's addresses. And I think that's the biggest risk that I can say as your local policing sergeant, we should be focusing on, along with the other priorities. But in my opinion, that's the biggest risk. We continue to do our other proactive jobs. I think I've spoken before where things, Apple products, for example, we're very good at tracking them now when we find them. We're working a bit more with the schools to get in early, like we have done, but we've stepped up over the last 6 months. Many sort of community groups who want our involvement, we happily work with, and that's particularly with the PCSOs. So yeah, that's sort of the area. Any questions?
Okay. Thank you, Colin. I know some of the councillors will have questions, but I always offer this opportunity for members of the audience to raise anything to inform us, and obviously following in terms of the reporting process. Mr. Bond at the back.
Yes, I wondered whether, in fact, your successes in Mill Road may have caused some of it to move over here, because the area behind this building, staff are telling me, is having an increasing problem with people lurking behind, drug soiling, bit of graffiti. There are some short-term measures we can take to make the incursions more difficult, but and longer term, hopefully, if we can ever get around to rebuilding it at the back, we'll design out the little cubby hole that's in there at the moment they lurk in. But I wondered whether you'd actually had any reports from this area, because it's surprised that some of this is actually happening during broad daylight, so it's not a case of an after dark thing, to the point where even male staff here are locking the door because they are concerned about what's going on outside.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Colin?
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if it always moves. The problem does move in the city. What I will do, I'll send some extra patrols down here regularly and make sure they come down here in the mornings, so we get every morning and sort it out. It wouldn't surprise me at all if doing the things you talk about during the day. As for reports, I'd have to look at the system to see how many reports, but we always encourage people to call in or email in. I can't promise you a non-response for someone just standing there, even going to relieving themselves. But the more reports we get, the more resources we can put into the area. I can bid for extra resources as well for some of my team. We might be short for staff, so I'll put some extra officers down there. But I'd encourage anyone just to report it 101 or send the email in, just so we know, and then I can get more resources.
Yeah, this has really only been brought to my attention in the past week, although I've been involved with the building over several years. So I will encourage the people who are noticing this to report it as and when it happens. Email, yes, the email address must be on here somewhere.
It's on the website, and just like Google it, you'll get our website.
So we'll make sure that you actually get some pattern. If there is a pattern, you can identify it.
Definitely, and to give you an example, we had, I think we probably moved people on to a degree, and they went to one of the play parks and they were causing a problem in there. That was brought to our attention. We targeted it for 2 weeks. We haven't had any reports since. So hopefully that will work here.
Okay, just an observation as a ward councillor of this area. I've certainly observed on several occasions police cars on Vicarage Terrace, so they obviously come out for an incident, and that will presumably be logged within the system. I'm not sure what the incidents were, but again, from observation, there's clearly drug activity at this rear entrance of the Borough Cemetery again over the last few months. And my guess is both Michael's, if that is related to this particular activity, obviously the surrounding streets are often not on in terms of the effect. That will come up under the priority you've identified anyway, dealing with the east area as a whole in terms of drug dealing and such like. But there are, over the years, you get to know certain characters, and I can't mention their names clearly in public, but and my suspicions are alerted when I see them hovering outside the back of the cemetery gates here. And I've reported that on several occasions, but I'm sure people are aware of that. Okay. Any further comments from the audience? Richard? Mr. Taylor?
Well, something that's mentioned in the Matters Arising. What's been done to improve the breakdown of violent crime, domestic versus otherwise, and are we going to get some information on the seriousness of injuries involved in the violent crimes?
I think this was brought up before, actually, with my previous inspector, and I think he, at the time, there was injuries would, I think, be very, very difficult simply from an IT point of view. I think you've got a better chance of breaking it down by classes of crime such as common assault, ABH, GBH, and then ultimately murder. I'll go away and find out if that is possible to do on the systems. I don't see any reason why we couldn't. It's simply if we can without an unreasonable cost.
Yeah, I raised this at the area chairs meeting, as I alluded to earlier, in a different context, but it did talk about how the figures reported to the area committees. Acting Inspector Jason Ragg attended that meeting, and the gist, I think, of Jason's answer, though they wouldn't obviously rule out a further breakdown within these area committee reports, that information is logged in other reports that go to various community safety partnership and other bodies that the council has membership of, and they can presumably be found if you know where to look on public access information systems. But they clearly there is a regular and similar reporting process for the 4 area committees, and I think what they're conscious of is making it as sort of similar across the board for all the councillors, and certainly Jason and Linda Kilkelly, who was at that meeting, as well as the city's community safety partnership officer, suggested those figures can be made available to whoever wish to sort of look at them, but not necessarily through the East Area report process. Councillor?
Okay, press and hold. If those breakdowns are going to be collected, I'd like to know, I'd like clarification of whether or not it would be possible to do a breakdown on violent crime for domestic violence abuse markers. Because as I understand it, I know, but I'm speaking to you, but you aren't a target. I mean, I know there are systemic lacks, which you're not responsible for. But as I understand it, some possibly goodly proportion of violent crime that takes place in public spaces is actually domestic violence spilling out of the home, as it were. And until we begin to try and collect data on that, we will never... It's another area where the whole picture of domestic violence is obscured, and I was the originator of this initial type of question when Jason Rudd was here, and my motive was simply what I'm talking about now, that we can only begin to really tackle domestic violence and abuse when we have a better picture of the whole pattern of incidents, and we won't do that as long as our data is incomplete. And so what I'd like to see eventually is that violent crime is analysed not only in terms of GBH and ABH and all the rest, but also in terms of domestic violence abuse. Whether what's happening is an incident between partners, or whether the perpetrator of violent crime, which does have DV markers, is actually engaged in domestic violence abuse in their home with another victim. Do you see what I mean? Is there anyone when we start picking this information up that will begin to have a larger picture? So I would appreciate if you could clarify whether that's happening and whether it could happen under present systems. Thanks, Colin.
Okay. I think for breaking it down, I think, as the Chair said, I think some of the data's out there. What I think possibly is, if I invite you to the police station to look at the processes, I mean, what also is every domestic incident has a set process you have to go through depending on what's happened. Every single domestic incident is then reviewed the next morning by senior management. It's then reviewed also by the domestic unit itself. I mean, just in the last few years, the amount of work that's gone into domestic violence is phenomenal in the police. But to break it down here, I think it goes back to what the Chair says. I think a lot of the data is available and improving. But I'm quite happy if you want to come down to the police station, I'll actually show you the systems. Maybe you can report back. I think that might be better than trying to bring it here.
I'd love to, but we'll arrange it.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Taylor's questions on violent crime as a whole about the breakdown, and that did form part of the discussion when the Acting Inspector Jason Ragg was at the Chair's meeting recently. As I say, that information is available in other formats and goes to different public arenas. Clearly, the question I asked was on behalf of the East Area Committee, so I'm not, going out of the jurisdiction of this area committee in terms of what I asked, but I mean, what they said, and I think it was appreciated and understood by certainly the area chairs and vice chairs present, that there is a consistent approach to the reporting to the area committees at present, and as far as they were concerned, it did fulfil the needs of the the reporting neighbourhood sort of reporting processes that were sort of fairly tried and tested over the past few years. Sarah Steggles, you can probably give us a bit more light as a...
I can't say much and I don't know much, but Linda Kelly just asked me to pass on that they are looking at doing an analysis of those figures at the crime and research team. So there may be more on that coming. That's all I can say.
Okay. There's various other councillors wanting to... members of the audience, sorry, before I run to councillors. Want to ask questions? No. Councillor Johnson, yes.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Sergeant Jordan for his report. I have a few questions now. At the last report we received, last briefing that we received in April, we had a gentleman, Mr. Roman, from the Abbey area, the Whitehill estate, and he raised a question of drug dealing, or alleged drug dealing in the Whitehill estate area. Can we have an update on what's been achieved specifically in respect of the Whitehill estate area? Have there been extra patrols? Have the police attended the neighbourhood watch meetings which was requested? I'd appreciate an update. We also, on the issue of drug dealing, there was a quote there was a story in the Cambridge News about the very issue Sergeant Norton referred to a lot in his report, but that is London drug dealers coming to Cambridge. And Inspector Jason Ragg was quoted as saying that vulnerable people in the city have been coerced into providing safe havens for drug dealers and the drugs themselves, and apparently residents have been offered food as an incentive, as well as cash and drugs. So this is obviously quite a concerning situation. What strategy is in place to assist vulnerable people who could potentially be pried upon by these unscrupulous people? My other question is page 22 refers to the meeting held in March in Abbey Ward about ASB. Whilst it was welcome, this initiative, nobody turned up. So the means of engagement, the ability for us to actually get the public involved, get residents on side so that we are in a position to assist with their issues, needs to be looked at again, not just by area, but not just by ward, but by street. We need to be proactive in looking at new ways and in engaging with people who wouldn't necessarily trust us as figures of authority. I know that the police and PCSOs, the City Council, Safer Communities team do great work, but some people just aren't receptive, and we need to do more work to make them receptive. There's a reference in the report about complex cases in Bison Road. Some additional information on that would be quite useful. And in respect of the figures on page 24, the other crime column, is there anything we need to be aware of? Are there any trends in that other crime column that we ought to be aware of? Are there is there a spike in a particular type of crime that's not obvious here? Thank you.
Okay, there's some questions there,
Sorry, Chair.
Colin. Just a point to note, a lot of the news stories you do read in the local paper are lifted straight out of our reports. So they are more or less covering what we've got in front of us. Sergeant Donham.
Right, okay, so neighbourhood watch meetings, yes, the PCSOs have been to the neighbourhood watch meetings. I know Mr. Rowan actually. I think Whitehill Road, when he first raised the issue, we just recovered half a kilo of, it was either cocaine or heroin from a raid there. We then did 2 subsequent drugs warrants in the road. We've also recently, this was nothing to do with London dealer, but there was a vulnerable adult in a dressing there, and his house had been taken over by a Cambridge nominal. And I say taken over, he'd just thrown the man out of the house and was living in it. It's hard to believe sometimes. He'd redecorated it. You just couldn't believe it. Put all the furniture in, and it was simple as that. So he was arrested. That's going to Crown Court later in the year. So that's more ongoing work. You're right what you said about food, drugs, and drinkers offered as well as money. When you say what's in place for sort of these vulnerable people, we don't we very much don't rock up and say you're housing a drug dealer, you're under arrest. We work very closely with the council. We do joint visits. I mean, I've personally offered with the council to drive this person to other accommodation and you know, give them a place of safety which the council housing have arranged. You know, we do that. We do offer that, and we really do help them. We can put special measures in place as well. If we think they're so scared about having to go to court over the matter, we won't use them as a witness. So there is an awful lot of support in place. There really, really is. And you know, and I would say 95% of people take that support and will do. Forreston Road, I know from memory there's been some, I think it's just complex cases. I think that's that can be like a neighbourhood dispute which has been on for many years. I can't guarantee that one from memory, but that's often what those things are. It could be, you know, it start with little things and just build over the years, and after about 10 years it will come to the police's attention because someone will flip and go wrong. But I can't exactly remember the details of that one, and I probably couldn't say. Other crime categories, this has come up many times before. Obviously it does include a few things. One of the things it does include is drugs, and it's one of the rare things in policing that the more success you have, the more crime you create. Because every time we find drugs, we create a crime. If we don't find the drugs, there's no crime. So often a rise in other crimes is quite good, because it means we're proactively seeking out the drugs. So that one does come up every now and then, and yeah. So I would like to see drugs broken down, but again, that comes back to the previous questions.
Thank you. Quite a few people to call on, so Councillor Kavanagh.
Actually, Councillor Johnson did preempt my question, which was related to other crime, but as a follow-through to that, I'd just like to ask Sergeant Norden, you know, in your professional judgment, if you had the choice, is there another area of crime you'd like to add to the priority list? Which that priority list I know is being generated from this committee, but from you as a policeman who aims to have positive achievements, is there an area of crime that you would like to concentrate on?
I probably should explain. My team, I run a very small team of 2 PCs, me, and 8 PCSOs. And we're very lucky that we can focus on the things that matter, mainly the local residents and businesses. What we call safe and neighbourhood officers go out to the 999 calls and deal with all this sort of day-to-day stuff and CID. So we really try and pick up the jobs that might slip through the net or mean that aren't necessarily a big job in the big scheme of things, but actually to that individual it means a lot. So I quite like that. I think the ASB is quite important because that really does affect a lot of people, businesses as well. Sometimes I feel maybe get forgotten. And also the drugs really does have an effect. So I think we focus on the 2 major areas, but we're very lucky. I'll give you an example that someone had their bike stolen. It might only be an £50 bike, but it was a £50 bike. They'd had it since they were a child, they're an adult. They're very attached to it. It got stolen. We found it in Leicester. We also found 16 other stolen ones, so it's very nice that it added to that. But that meant a lot to them, and I think it's very nice that their local policing team can do that for them. So I think we've got the 2 big areas that really matter, which is the ASB and the drugs, because I think they're the biggest areas. So I think we do focus on the right ones. And I could say I really don't like burglars, and I would love to just spend my entire day catching burglars, but actually we've got a team that already does that. So there's many other priorities that are good causes and we should do, but actually it's a bit like domestics, is very well covered with the whole team, so I'd almost be doing the same work as them. So I think we've probably got the right areas.
Fine, thanks. That's a genuine passion, isn't it? I don't know. Yeah. Who's next? Councillor Roberts.
Hiya. More of a point than a question. Over the summer, as a ward councillor in Abbey, I've received quite a few emails from residents about a particular rise in antisocial behaviour along Newmarket Road, just from the roundabout, Elizabeth Way roundabout to the bridge, in that sort of corridor there. So I just, having chatted to a lot of them, there was sort of an alcoholic element to some of it, and some of it not so much, but particularly the residents around Stanley Road. So I just thought I'd raise that, so you know, and you're aware.
So it's just good. I think there's 2 things. One, I think it's quite common knowledge. The access surgeries by Elizabeth Way roundabout, that does attract say an ASB. You've also got a few other shops down there. We do patrol down there. It's on the daily patrols, and we are aware and we do focus on it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Robinson.
All right, thanks. we went to a Mill Road Traders meeting last night, and they continue to be concerned about antisocial behaviour and street drinking. And we're trying to work quite closely with them, and we're going to go back to their next meeting. We wondered if for street drinking on Milk Road, the incidents that occur, whether we could have a monthly report back.
These reports are quarterly, and they do cover those type of incidents, don't they?
I think what I do, if I get PCSO Tony Marriott, who's the PCSO for Mill Road, he can give you some sort of small breakdown for that. If it's possible in the computer system, I'm sure he'd do it for you, and that can report back to that committee.
Yeah, because what we were finding last night very much about perceptions. People think there's a lot more street drinking going on, and when you get a 3 monthly statistic, if that's gone on for 3 months, people have been moaning, nobody remembers which one it is. Whereas if we go back next month with this month's statistics, then we can go, well, there were 7 or there were 20, and I think that would be much more successful.
I think that's very true. If you look at the actual amount that people call in, that's true. I mean, I've been in post now for about 3 years, and I know Mill Road is better than it was 3 years ago. It was quite bad, and if you look at other places in the city, clearly they've got a worse problem. But I'll get Tony to have a look at that and report back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson, do you still want to come in?
It's covered.
That's covered.
It's covered, yeah.
Okay.
Can I come in? One more item?
Yes, Councillor.
Thank you. Also, what emerged from Mill Road Traders Association meeting last night was one person reported very good response from 101 service, but another person reported very bad service. And I've spoken to the PCC about that, and I do have an email address from one of his assistants that I can channel complaints to, but what do individuals do? I mean, one of the questions that was asked was whether or not people could report directly to PCSOs. And would that then be logged as an incident? Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes, you can report, of course, directly to PCSOs. That's really one of the key functions while they're there. I think I'd like them just to go directly to it and deal with it, and then maybe create an incident afterwards. But there should be an incident created afterwards, as a rule. So there will be one. Yes, it is recorded in the statistics.
But what very often happens when people are in 101 and they wait for 10-15 minutes, they just give up, and the incident by that time has perhaps abated or ceased to be, or do you know? So it, in effect, it doesn't get reported, and so again, we don't have a clear picture.
I'm aware about 101 from what I read in the press. I don't know the statistics for it, and with the great respect, it's above my pay grade.
No.
If there's issues with 101, I do know there is issues with 101, or there has been in the past. I think it's dramatically improved from my understanding. But again, I encourage everyone to report anything to police. I can only encourage people to report, and I hope the system works.
Brilliant.
But I do believe it is improving.
Okay.
So Councillor Ball then. I'll take Councillor Robertson, and hopefully that we can get to the priorities then.
Thank you, Chairman. I support the priorities as they are. Thank you for the report, Sergeant Norton. I do recognise, at least on the Romsey side of the Mill Road Railway Bridge, that there has been a reduction in antisocial behaviour. I think actually about a year ago we did have some recurrent problems, and I think it was a group of people from another part of the country, and that doesn't seem, at least to me, to be a problem anymore. So I do recognise the improvement there. I wanted to ask though about something else. On the County Council's Health Committee, we're doing a lot of work on mental health, and something that's become apparent is that the level of support in Cambridge, but actually to an even greater extent outside Cambridge, is very poor for people who have been discharged from specialist services at the Mental Health Trust, and they can often find it difficult to get sort of re-referred or to actually get on to specialist treatment again once they're discharged from the Mental Health Trust. So they can find themselves sort of, outside the loop, really, of health services, and there's not enough support, they have problems, they end up in A&E, bouncing between services. And I was just wondering if you had any sort of perspective on the number of people you were dealing with where there was a mental health element, if that was something you were able to comment on.
I have no idea on the percentage at all, and I think you probably find the information online somewhere. I'm sure there's been studies into it. We do deal with people with mental health. What I will say is we have excellent working relationship with Adam Brooks, Fulbourn. We have a central referral unit we've got all our concerns to, and that will fire off to GPs and all sorts of agencies for support. So statistical wise I have no idea. And what I will say is the local policing team, we work very closely with mental health for some of the slightly more enforcement aspects and to assist them if they've got mental health work to carry out. So we do work closely, but as a percentage I have no idea.
Sorry, percentage was a bad question perhaps. I mean, anecdotally, can you comment on that element of your work? We'll be following this up separately.
I think it's probably better research online, really. I don't have a problem with when I engage with mental health services, I found them to be very good.
Sorry, I wasn't criticising mental health, I was just saying that outside specialised services, there doesn't seem to be a lot of support.
It probably goes beyond my team, really, because we will do the initial, if someone's suffering, if they're on a railway line, for example, we will get them off the railway line and we will pass them on to the mental health team or the ambulance service, and I will do a referral. That's where my team's work stops. We are to preserve life. So I cannot answer that because I don't work in that area in detail.
Thank you. We do understand that, Councillor. Councillor Robertson.
Can I go back to the matter of the Greening 101? I understand that you can't do anything with it, but could you report it to your seniors? And I think we should also be taking it up with the police. At the meeting with the traders last night, we were talking about them having to use 999 when they shouldn't have to do that. It's wasting everybody's time if they have to resort to doing that. But clearly we're encouraging the traders to report incidents rather than just not do so or find it inconvenient because they can't get through. So I think we've got to work together on this.
I'll definitely feed it back.
Thank you. Okay, can I, nobody suggest any of the priorities. Can I just put the priorities to the vote, please? Yeah? All those in favour, please show. Thank you. And once again, big thank you to Sergeant Norden and his team for all the work they've been doing the last 3 months, and thank you very much indeed.
I'll stay to the end of the interval for any questions anyone wants to reply to.
Okay, thank you.